Hello again, I'm Martyn Heyne, and today, by popular demand, let's finally talk about the A-B stereo technique, also known as the spaced pair. While there are many radically different ways to create great results in music recording, an expertly executed spaced pair in a great acoustic environment is just one of the most impressively sounding and most satisfying things I've come across. So I hope I can give you some ideas today on how to improve these types of setups, or spark your interest in them in case you haven't given them a go as of yet. Quick service announcement: the volume of this subject has gotten mildly out of hand, so this is going to be a two-parter. Alright, so spaced pair, or AB, refers to a stereo miking technique that is seeking to create only time differences between the left and the right channel in order to create a stereo image. If this idea is news to you, perhaps it would be best if you could watch this video about stereo miking techniques first. For AB, omni microphones or pressure transducers are often, though not necessarily, the preferred choice. Again, if you're not familiar with this type of microphone, ideally you'd watch this video about those microphones first and then proceed here. Okay, now let's look at the types of recordings where the spaced pair would be a great choice. First of all, because it's possible to do this technique with omnis, it can be used to capture even very large ensembles all at once with only one main microphone pickup. As discussed previously, omnis are the only microphones that will translate even the lowest notes correctly, and therefore it's possible to get away without any spot microphones for bass instruments, or in fact any further microphones at all, although, as we'll see, that is rather challenging. Rooms that are fairly to very large and sound particularly good will especially benefit from an AB setup, because this technique is the best at conveying a sense of depth in a recording. This can be particularly impressive for large ensembles, but also for smaller instrumentations in larger and acoustically beneficial rooms. The clarity of localization from an AB setup is quite good in the center of the image, although not as good as from a coincident setup or indeed real life, and then gradually less so towards the sides for reasons I will get into. This is not necessarily a disadvantage, and especially for smaller groups or soloists, can be used somewhat like a bokeh in photography, where with a very large aperture only the subject is in focus, and the surrounding items, when placed at different distances than the subject, will appear blurry. And we all love the look of that, don't we? So the main advantages are a wonderful, if somewhat artificial width, a fantastic sense of depth, and the natural low-end extension. One more aspect that can be useful is that it's easy to create a very good mono version by simply discarding one of the channels. The result will be almost perfect, save for the fact that the reverb balance will feel a little bit different, because the source and the ambient sound will now be coming from the exact same point, and there will be a little more masking between them as a result. However, and let's use this as the segue into the disadvantages, if the spaced pair recording is summed into mono, for example in the playback device, the result will be some fairly nasty comb filtering, and in that case it would actually make quite a bad mono version. To minimize problems with summing in advance, one could make sure that the instruments with a stronger low end are positioned in the center of the stereo image, so that they won't suffer from potential cancellation as much. Another contraindication for AB are acoustically problematic or tiny rooms. If the recording space is not great, omnis will generally only work right up close to the source, so not an approach for a main pickup. And the biggest strengths of a spaced pair, such as the sense of depth, are also not happening if there is none to begin with. Additionally, there may be material that benefits from a very precise left-right localization. Perhaps a modern piece where the stage setup has been very deliberately chosen, or something like film dialogue, and I would guess really anything that's not music. In those cases, a coincident or near coincident setup would certainly be better. Lastly, what some people consider to be the special magic of a spaced pair recording might be considered artificial by others. This is a question of taste, of course, but it must be said that there are some issues with artificiality. There is, for example, the phenomenon that some sources may appear to jump around in the stereo image a little bit, when the phase relationship between the two channels for a particular frequency can be misinterpreted by the listener. So in conclusion, AB has its drawbacks, as does any stereo technique. But the unique beauty with which it captures acoustic events has made it probably even more popular in that application today than it's already been in the past. Okay, let's say we have our acoustically wonderful location and now it's time to figure out how to set up the recording. First of all, some AB ground rules. Number 1, for a clean, time difference only recording, keep the microphones parallel. They're basically supposed to record the exact same thing, except with a time difference between them. Number 2, the distance between the microphones must be substantially smaller than the distance between them and the source. Otherwise, you'll end up recording level differences. Number 3, you must never pan the microphones of an AB recording. The left microphone goes to the left channel and the right microphone goes to the right channel only. Number 4, mid-side treatments such as stereo wideners will collapse the depth. None of that stuff for a good AB recording, please. Okay, with that out the way, let's go through some of the parameters that deserve attention. Unfortunately, however, as we'll see, we cannot simply set each of those to our liking, but we must find a compromise that overall does justice to the situation the best. First up is reverb balance, or in other words, the relative amount of direct sound from the instruments versus the ambience from the room. This is an essential matter for music recording. I could, and by the looks of it will, go much further into detail from a musical perspective, but for the time being, let's consider the technical side. In any case, you have to take the musical content into account to get this right. Getting the reverb balance right will be much easier if the acoustics of the recording room are already very fitting to the music. However, that's not the end of it, and there is no guarantee that the balance in the recording will match that of real life. Conversely, it's very well possible that the recorded reverb balance will be better than it was in reality. Basically, the nearer you are to the instruments, the drier it will sound, and as you back off, you increase the ambience. Now, unless you're in a recording studio with a proper control room, it may actually be fairly tricky to accurately judge the amount of ambience in the recording. A set of speakers in the recording room will be pretty much useless, and a makeshift control room, i.e. the janitor closet, may also have acoustics that influence the playback of the speakers to an extent that will be very difficult to judge. In such cases, I would recommend headphones. Of course, those are notoriously different from speakers when it comes to the representation of depth and ambience in particular, but I feel that nowadays we have such regular exposure to the headphone sound and so much more experience with it than perhaps engineers did in the past, that would be my approach. If in doubt, and there almost certainly will be doubt regarding the reverb balance, I suggest you err on the dry side of things. That's because I think you'll have a much better time adding additional reverb to a recording afterwards, be it artificial or by means of an extra ambient pair on a separate track, than you will have trying to get more clarity out of an already too washy recording. In fact, I suggest to set aside any unnecessary pride in a perfect microphone technique from the get-go and just get the last 5% exactly right in a mixing room. Another aspect that changes with the distance of the microphones is the clarity of depth of the direct sound. So for a large group of musicians, the sense of distance that you have from the separate rows will be better if you're closer to the musicians, and will become less distinct as you back off. This is another reason for omnis in this application, because a particular reverb ratio will be achieved much closer to the source compared to, for example, cardioids. Another consideration is the relative distance to the various instruments. So, for example, with an orchestral recording, if you record them from the audience perspective, you will be a lot closer to the strings than you will be to the brass and the timpani. That's why it can often be a good approach to go up and forwards. That way you keep your relative distance to the front, but you get closer to the back. Quite commonly, the main pickup will be somewhere above the conductor or even further into the stage. And in general, it's a good idea to keep in mind that you have 3 dimensions to move in rather than just back to front. And this not only applies to large ensembles. Okay, let's take a break here for today. As mentioned in the beginning, this is going to be a 2-part subject. So in the next episode, we're going to tackle the all-important recording angle. So make sure that you are subscribed here and turned on the notifications for that. By the way, in these recent videos, I've failed to say something along the lines of write some comments, and what do you know, there were far fewer comments. So again, if you have any questions, do write them in the comments. I read them all and mostly manage to come up with somewhat intelligible answers too. Also, if you have personal experience with the subject, I, and I'm sure all the other viewers too, would love to get your perspective on the matter, so do get involved. Each subject grows seemingly endless the longer I think about it. So I'm almost certainly leaving out important aspects every time. Don't just sit there and mumble at the screen. Enlighten your fellow brothers and sisters and me with your experiences, please. And thank you very much for listening today. Speak soon.